If this goes on, don't panic. Bringing hope to the world through speculative fiction.
Hello, everyone. Regular listeners will know, but for those who have missed it over the years, Diane and I, Alan, have an ongoing discussion about her love of military science fiction and my lack of enthusiasm for it. So Diane decided to do a column on why she loves it. This is the second part of that series. I recommend you go back to the first part and listen to that first. As a reminder, these episodes include a personal essay monologued by Diane with pieces of interview dispersed throughout. Before we get started, please note that this column includes discussions of PTSD, mental health, and various traumatic experiences. Diane Morrison, they, is a blue-collar, neurodiverse, queer author of short and long speculative fiction and pagan nonfiction. She is a person of contradictions, an intellectual without a college degree, a fighter who hates bullies, a progressive activist who is pro-military and anti-war. They have been a taxi dispatcher, a care aide, a housekeeper, a thief, a mother, a busker, and a rock singer, and they still do folk music from time to time. Her work has appeared with Third Flatiron Press, Cosmas Infinities, and the lunar punk anthology Bioluminescent. But so far, the highlight of her writing career has been being longlisted for a Hugo for her work on the fan cast If This Goes On, Don't Panic. They teach a class at the Rambo Academy for Wayward Writers on finding time to write, and the second and third novels in their Toy Soldier Saga series are scheduled to come out later this year. They live in BC, Canada, with their husband and their partner, and their greatest joy is their 3 grandchildren. She is fighting PTSD one day at a time.
Sometimes in military sci-fi, the protagonist becomes a prisoner of war. The first such story I read was The Borders of Infinity by Lois McMaster Bujold. The fact that this story does not have a Nebula or a Hugo tells me everything I need to know about the industry opinion of military sci-fi. The best it managed was longlisted for a Locus. There were other books in the Vorkosigan saga that won awards, don't get me wrong, but they're the least warlike of these books about war, if that makes any sense. One of the stories that did win awards, The Mountains of Mourning, was also in the collection I read. It was heartbreaking. It deserved its kudos, but so did The Borders of Infinity. In this story, the protagonist, a small, disabled, unlikely hero named Miles Vorkosigan, who has fragile bones but insisted on being a soldier anyway, infiltrates a prison camp. The captors obey the letter of their equivalent of the Geneva Conventions, but in a way deliberately calculated to maximize cruelty. You have to have a certain amount of space per prisoner, so this space is provided in a force field bubble, with no other shelter or privacy. You have to have a certain amount of daylight, so they just leave the lights on all the time. You have to provide a certain number of calories and balanced nutrition for each prisoner, so they toss in a single pile of nutritious ration bars at random times and locations each day, and the prisoners must fight each other for those rations. Somehow, under these conditions, Miles must not only maintain his own sense of self and sanity, he must rally the prisoners to work together and effect a prison break.
How does military science fiction represent disabled heroes differently than other subgenres?
Oh, that's a very good question. Yeah, that's a very good question. For one thing, you almost don't notice in many ways, right? Depending on who's doing the writing.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, let me take 2 examples, right? Miles Vorkosigan again, Lois McMaster Bujold's character is a disabled hero,
Mhm.
right? So is Honor Harrington, at least eventually. You see, now Miles Vorkosigan was born with a disorder caused by an attack on his mother while she was pregnant. She was exposed to this toxic gas, right? In a political attack that related to the war and politics that was going on at the time in those novels, right? So he has weak bones. They break really easily. He's also born into a noble family that has a military expectation and tradition. His father is an admiral, right? He really wants to be a soldier more than anything else in the world, but he cannot pass the entry requirements. He absolutely fails the physical portion in a dramatic way, right? And he is crushed. But then circumstances put him in a situation where he ends up having to protect the emperor, who is a boy who is about his age, right? Because his father was killed in the political strife that resulted in Miles' disability, right? And, they're both having existential crisis. The emperor sneaks away in the middle of the night and ends up in a situation where Miles has to protect his identity and get him back to the home planet before somebody realizes who he is and takes him hostage and, whatever else, right? So, he ends up comporting himself despite his disability because in a way that is exemplary, right? Because he's a thoughtful character, right? He is clever. He has studied strategy and tactics. He has studied politics. He has studied spying, and he knows, right, what to do in these situations, even though he's really just a kid, right? And he ends up like, this is not, he ends up, he saves the emperor. So they put him to work in a secret service as opposed to a, open military. Right. And this is how he launches his military career. And I really love the way it can show that, because obviously war situations can be very physical, right? But he compensates because he's really smart. Sometimes he ends up in situations where it doesn't matter how smart he is. He's still stymied.
Right.
Like if he ends up being taken prisoner by anybody, he's screwed because, the minute they start beating him for questioning, he's going to bust up into a bunch of pieces, right? So, yeah, right? Like there's things where it can't help him, but it helps him enough in other situations and it shows a different kind of soldier, right? It shows us that soldiers are not, especially in the modern day, grunts. There is way too much intelligence involved in having to deal with the technology and strategies of modern warfare. And this has been true since the Cold War, right? So I think it's very empowering because I'm a smart person who is small, right? And I compensate with my brain too, I guess, right? Honor Harrington, different story, but similar. Honor Harrington is taken prisoner by the bad guys at the 5th novel in the series and ends up getting severely injured. She loses an eye and an arm. Right? Later on, she compensates with cybernetics, but they have different abilities. There's a couple of little toys that are worked in that eventually become important. Like there's a sighting system built into the cybernetic eye, because why not? And that matters at one point, right? But, in many ways, it's just not as good as your living tissue. This is why we're not all the street samurai out of Shadowrun yet, right?
Right.
But by that time, it's a little different because she's in a position where she is, high brass. So it's more about politics and strategy at that point. She's a very clever character too.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So, but there are things that she runs into occasionally that are problems based on her disability. And I like that. I think military sci-fi gives those kind of venues an opportunity to show us that disability doesn't have to stop you. It means you have to do things differently, right? It's why I like the term differently abled, right? We have to find different ways to do things than the way that is modeled to us because we lack something that would enable us to do it that way. But it doesn't mean we can't.
Right.
And it doesn't mean that our contributions are not valuable.
We like to see defiance in POW stories. We like strong characters with agency. We want them to spit in the faces of their captors and torturers and tell them to go fuck themselves. Miles didn't do that. Miles would have been crushed like an eggshell if he'd tried. People, other prisoners, beat him up and stole his things, so he had to walk around, broken and naked, as soon as he got there. He had to act, to pretend to be something he wasn't, and on 2 or 3 different layers. His defiance was different, internal. His mind remained free. That story haunted me. I think I was 11 when I first read it. I used to think about it a lot. Like, I thought about the movie Empire of the Sun. Have you seen it? Nobody expected such a thing out of Spielberg in 1987, not after Jaws and E.T. and Close Encounters of the Third Kind. I probably wouldn't have watched it myself if it weren't a Spielberg movie. I wondered why I felt such an affinity with Miles and that little boy. Why I cried at the stories of Holocaust survivors when most of my classmates just didn't understand. I'm not a soldier. I've never been a POW. I'm just a middle-aged bigender woman, pushing 50, starting to look her age. I'm 5 feet tall, weigh maybe 115 pounds. I have long brown hair, usually with graying roots. I'm stronger than the average 50-year-old writer, though. Not as strong as I was before I lost all that weight during my breakdown, but I'm starting to put muscle mass back on again. It's taking longer than I think it should. I used to put on muscle like nobody's business. But one of the hidden side effects of PTSD is poor muscle tone. You see, post-traumatic stress disorder is a condition that results from exposure to extreme danger or trauma. Some people are using the term post-traumatic stress injury now, and I like that, because it's not just about psychology. It's brain damage. Exposed to a toxic level of cortisol, the stress chemical that jacks your body up when you need to fight or flee, it poisons you. Your amygdala, the red alert system for your body, it enlarges, expands, grows new neurons so that it can be even more sensitive to the next threat that might claim your life or the life of someone you care about. It's meant to keep you and yours alive. That change is permanent. And it can get worse with repeated exposure to trauma, which people with PTSD are subject to. It also damages your hippocampus, which processes short-term memory to long-term memory, and your prefrontal cortex, the source of logical thinking. So it makes your fight-or-flight system more sensitive. Then it impairs absolutely everything that might let you shut it off. And then it pours even more dangerous levels of cortisol into your system. Rinse and repeat. Those you can fix, but it takes work and time. Maybe think of cortisol like a red alert protocol in a space opera. It diverts power away from unessential systems and concentrates the available energy on attack and defense. One thing it does is deprioritize the digestive system, because that can wait until the threat is past. Only if it doesn't pass for a week, that creates problems. Like IBS. You know, I went to my doctor for my bowel issues more than 15 years ago. He told me it was IBS, patted me on the head, and sent me on my way. Eat more fiber, he said, and dismissed me when I said that made it worse. Why didn't anyone tell me IBS is a hallmark symptom of PTSD? It also limits the absorption of amino acids, making it harder to build and maintain muscle. Since about 60% of your immune system is located in your now deprioritized digestive system, you get sick more often or develop or experience worsened allergies. It draws moisture away from your skin, so you scar more easily, wrinkle more quickly, and develop skin problems like eczema or visible stretch marks. You might gain or lose weight, or find it hard to keep off due to unbalanced hormones. Asthma can develop or worsen. Cell repair is damaged too, so wounds take longer to heal. That, and unconsciously tensing muscles all the time, and the lack of sleep combine for a variety of aches and pains, and chronic fatigue is pretty much to be expected.
Do you feel that military SF also tends to treat mental health differently than other subgenres?
That's another very good question. Okay, so there's two types of military science fiction in this respect.
Okay.
One of them ignores mental health entirely. I have no interest in that.
Okay.
Right. This is the type that does the whole, he's just he's James Bond. He's never fazed by anything. I don't have time for you. Right.
Right.
The ones that don't do that, I mean, this is my draw to it, really. Right. The ones that don't do that talk about post-traumatic stress and how it affects their protagonists. And you see it, right? Like, I think I was talking about Jack Campbell, right? Writes the, Defiant, all those kind of titles. It's Chris Longknife is the protagonist there, right?
Yeah, you've mentioned those, yeah.
He spends a lot of time dealing with her trauma. And that turns what would be, frankly, pulp, right, into something that's deeper. Because you get to see her being human and, she doesn't find this easy, but she keeps coming back to the fight anyway.
Mm-hmm.
That's empowering for someone who's been through trauma, at least from my perspective. The belief that I don't have to let this shit stop me. I don't have to live in fear.
Right.
I can take that, use it, right? Go forward, accomplish things. I can get positives out of it. I can find, I get less stressed by things that are minor, unless they happen to be a trauma trigger, right? But
right.
If they're, I have more courage for doing things that other people wouldn't, because when you've faced mortal terror, it doesn't seem like such a big deal, And it's useful to see that, right? Because what's our stereotype? Our stereotype is a person who's dealt with trauma as a mess. Okay, so I'm a mess, but I'm a useful mess,
Yeah, I can relate to that.
Right?
Sleep. If only I could sleep. It's 4:30 a.m. I'm awake, again. I've learned there's no point in trying to sleep until my brain shuts off, so I just press on in the evening until I literally fall asleep in my computer chair. But then, often when the stress is bad, or sometimes for no reason at all, I'm awake in the middle of the night anyway. Something startles me. A sudden noise, the end of a noise, the cat jumps on my foot, who knows? It has nothing to do with the stimulus anyway. It's all about how the body fires a shot of cortisol into your system at about 3 a.m., so you're ready and have peak responses right when you get up. I don't need the help. I've got too much of that shit in my system as it is. But there's no point in lying there and forcing sleep because it won't help, and I'll just get bored and frustrated. So, up I get, and now I'm writing again. This is nothing new. It's been with me since high school. I used to joke that I guessed I was just bad at sleeping. As long as I can remember, people have been expressing their frustration with me about it. When it's gone on for a few days, it has all the effects you'd expect. I get grumpy and impatient, distracted, inattentive, and have no energy for anything. It has effects you wouldn't expect, too. It makes my IBS worse, for example, which makes it harder to sleep. Don't give me any suggestions. I've tried them all. Dimmed light, extra light, regular exercise, bedtime routines, progressive muscle relaxation, soft music, audiobooks, reduced caffeine, increased caffeine, chamomile tea, warm milk, meditation, yoga, ASMR, brainwave entrainment, reading, counting sheep, color therapy, lying in bed all night and relaxing, lying in bed only when I intend to sleep, dimming my computer screen at 9 p.m., eating before going to bed, not eating for several hours before going to bed, sun lamps and sitting in the dark, aromatherapy, herbal remedies, special diets, prescription and non-prescription drugs. Sometimes massage helps, but I can't get that often. I haven't tried hypnosis yet, but I'm thinking about it. Studies suggest a weighted blanket might help, so I'm looking for one. Right now, I'm experimenting with smoking a joint. That's something I've taken up recently. Studies show that vets with PTSD who smoke pot are 2.5 times more likely than vets with PTSD who don't to show reduction in symptoms or to no longer meet the criteria for PTSD within a year. Apparently, cannabis reduces the activity of that malfunctioning amygdala and makes it easier to form new memories over the old traumatic ones. So hey, I'll try it. After that, I'll go back to my old standby. Smoke a half cheroot while working on something else for distraction. 42% of people with PTSD smoke tobacco products. Turns out that nicotine is a powerful, reversible, selective norepinephrine reuptake inhibitor, a type of antidepressant that works by limiting your brain's ability to reabsorb norepinephrine. A lot of people who smoke say that it calms them down. Not really. But it does help prevent our broken brains from continuing to jack us up. You know what works best? Finding a place with light that's not glaringly bright, where there are steady voices chattering at a regular conversational level. Ideally, those voices keep chatting without interruption for 8 hours. If they're suddenly too loud, or they suddenly stop, I snap awake. The other night, I woke up because the video I was listening to started skipping. Windows had decided to update or something. I made use of the emotional mindfulness stuff I've been learning in therapy. What is it that you're feeling? Why do you think it is that you feel that way? And I remembered that when my husband was in the ICU after his car accident, I was staying in a friend's basement suite in Vancouver so I could be with him. I'd stay until they threw me out at night, and then I'd go back to this silent, empty apartment on the city bus. I would phone his voicemail, just so that I could hear the sound of his voice, and then I would try to sleep. But it was so quiet. I was so alone. I couldn't stand it, so I'd put on the extended edition Lord of the Rings commentary discs and slap on some headphones. But when the disc stopped, it would keep skipping over the menu screen. The music would keep restarting, you see. And I would wake up and change the disc over and try to get a couple more hours in. Sometimes I go pour myself a hot bath. I lock the door, and I put on a news program in the background or something, and I fall asleep there. I feel safe there. As a child, I was woken up more than once by my mother beating me, so my bed doesn't feel safe, especially when I'm alone. But no one would ever disturb me in the bathroom. At least it's nice to know I'm not doing it to myself by hyper-focusing on the book I'm reading or my latest project, as many well-intentioned people who love me have given me shit for over the years.
At one point in your monologue, you talk about internal defiance with the Miles character, right?
Oh, yeah.
what does the internal defiance of Miles represent that a more violence in your face defiance does not?
Sometimes, no matter how much you hit the thing, it's a brick wall, right? There are situations that you cannot win, right?
Mm-hmm.
We've talked about this because we've discussed the theme of hope punk. I think this was our first interview, actually. We discussed the idea that, sometimes you got to take the corporate job because you're not going to bring down capitalism in an afternoon. You can't defeat it, not on your own.
Right.
But you don't have to subscribe to it. You don't have to agree with it. You can do the things you have to do to get by, to survive, and maintain yourself. You can go, yeah, you know what? This whole system is bullshit and I want nothing to do with it. And the minute something happens to undermine it, I'm going to help and I'm going to do what I can to undermine it in the meantime. You can do that. That's what it represents to me.
I like that because I feel that way a lot about my life. You know what I mean? I'm sure you do too.
Absolutely. I think we all do.
Yeah. I've had a conversation about this with Rick Claypool because Rick, a former contributor to the podcast, he did the Spec Fic Partisan column for a while.
Yeah, good series.
He works at a nonprofit organization that basically investigates and tracks corporate, malfeasance maybe, or, wrongdoing, right? And I've had this exact chat with him saying, sometimes I feel bad working for who I work for, and I'm not going to say who I work for, but let's just say that my politics are inherently against what they do. I will add this though; they're not a defense contractor or anything like that. Okay,
fair enough.
And I told him, like, man, I just feel so bad working for this company. He's like, don't feel so bad. He's like, there's a lot of great people that work in a corporation that's pretty evil, And he's like, there's a lot of evil people who work in good nonprofit places. He's like, trust me, I know.
Oh God, can I tell you some stories? But yes.
Right. So I just very much can relate to that. I 100% agree. And I do have to remind myself that from time to time when I'm feeling like, man, this place, I just can't handle it.
My background is also community organizing, right? So I feel you, Rick. I feel you. Sometimes people get into, quote unquote, good causes because they want to feel like the center of attention and they want everyone to pat them on the head for being a good person. And really what they are is an egotist or a narcissist.
Right.
It happens.
That does not surprise me. Yeah.
The best military sci-fi writers know. Most of them know to get the sleep thing right. They've read that much. The really good ones do better. Miles Vorkosigan throws himself like a madman into projects when he can't sleep, in the same way that I do. He struggles to heal wounds properly, and that's probably not just because of his disability. He ages prematurely. The commander in Ender's Game loses and puts on weight at intervals, and his subordinates remark on it. My bowels have finally moved. Sometimes that helps. Let's try this again.
All right, and that's it this time. If you've enjoyed this column or anything on our podcast, please share us with your friends on social media, and you can always go out there and give us a like or give us a review. We'll see you again next time. Thank you.